Greetings, fellow duelists. This is Sage Armageddon coming to you again with another Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel video. Now, in this particular video, what I wanted to go ahead and do is get into deck building a little bit. This is kind of a class and discussion for those that are probably newer to Yu-Gi-Oh! And want to learn some tips to help advance their ability to build in the game, and maybe even those that are familiar with deck building or even advanced with deck building. As there may be some terms or methods of thinking that are a bit elusive that people might not necessarily be aware of in general. Right? Same goes for me. That's why I often tell those that watch my content that if you have any specific suggestions or ideas, feel free to share them, because sometimes they're just methods of thinking and knowledge that can really help to solve quote unquote issues that players might be encountering. But in general, this is going to be more of a breakdown about deck building. I'm going to start at a very basic point, just for those that may be a bit newer to Yu-Gi-Oh! In general. But as I stated, the content here can also be applicable to players that are a bit more knowledgeable of the game or that are highly advanced. As I can tell you myself, there are some concepts when it comes basic concepts that I just recently learned within the last half a year or so. Very basic stuff that you would think people would already know, but sometimes it's not as developed, right? But we'll go ahead and begin. So what I want to discuss here is, okay, we're going to start out. So some people might be thinking, okay, what type of deck should I pick, right? So there are many different ways that you can go about trying to decide what type of deck to pick. You can go based off of statistics, what has the highest percentage of victory, what type of decks are very good against the meta or play environment that you are playing in, what type of deck suits you, right? The card art, even something as simple as that, like how did the cards look? Do you have fun with the style of deck that it is? Etc., etc. There are all types of different factors that weigh into someone deciding how they want to play or what type of deck they would like to pick, right? So I have here a list of different cards here. Now, I'm going to go over some simple definitions of the type of decks you might run into, but it's not a complete or exhaustive method of describing these types of decks. Some of these decks can be given different names, and they can be understood to behave differently. But the terminology I'm going to use is what I'm somewhat familiar with. So let's go ahead and begin for now. So I have here a list of cards that are supposed to represent different ideas. So we have Dark Magician is our first. Now, I know a lot of people probably, oh, Dark Magician's bad. Why do you have that here? Okay, look, maybe not, right? But I've seen some people do pretty decently with Dark Magician. So basically, the type of deck that this deck is I would call it a ramp deck. That's actually a term that is often used in Magic the Gathering, but it's a deck where you have to set up multiple pieces, and once you get the deck quote unquote ramped to the position that you want it, it can be very difficult, if not downright impossible to beat. So Dark Magician typically wants to set up a board with the fusion monster, with a continuous spell card, Dark Magic Circle, I believe it's called, and a continuous trap known as Eternal Soul. When they have a combination of those three cards, that's usually GG unless the opponent has a kaiju or something like that, but not always. It's not the most impossible thing to break. An underworld goddess could do the trick, right? But it still is kind of difficult. But it requires a lot of setup. that's the type of deck that is. These types of decks that require a lot of setup are not as competitively viable because when you're playing in Yu-Gi-Oh, Yu-Gi-Oh is all about speed and getting things done as soon as possible nowadays. So having to set up multiple cards in order to get a threat on board just is not considered effective enough. Most of the decks that people would even, well, most decks people won't even consider using unless you can perform a game-ending or threatening scenario with simply one card. So I'll get into that a bit more in a future video, but that's pretty much the gist of what Dark Magician is. Blue Eyes, you probably play Blue Eyes in a myriad of different ways. You can play it as a combo type of variant. You can play it as a semi-ramp variant because of some of the support with the trap cards and using things like continuous trap cards. I've seen people use Blue Eyes with Tenyi so that they can control the game with the counter trap cards that the Tenyi possess. But yeah, Blue Eyes is another deck that is often considered to not be that good. But it can definitely be a combo deck as well, where you spam out a bunch of monsters, but it's most likely not going to be a pure Blue Eyes deck. Because without other engines to support it, the deck does not have the consistency that it needs to put out a threat. Meaning basically it can't do anything seriously threatening to the opponent with just one card. You need like 2 or 3 cards with Blue Eyes, which is one of the reasons why it's not on the radar in Master Duel. But apparently in the current play environment in the OCG and Paper Yu-Gi-Oh, Blue Eyes has just got a new structure deck recently, as putting it more on the map, and it can actually do some pretty devastating stuff from what I have seen. So, but for right now, Blue Eyes, it can be played a myriad of different ways. Combo, kind of a semi-ramp type of situation, right? Next up, we have Exodia. Exodia is what I call the quintessential gimmick deck. Whole goal of Exodia, obviously, is to get the 5 pieces in your hand. You pretty much want to go first with this deck because this deck does not do anything to engage with the general game mechanics at all. This is hence why I call it a gimmick deck. Gimmick decks like these, or gimmick decks in general, are usually for fun. They kind of just don't have the tools necessary to actually engage the game appropriately. Like for example, a gimmick deck like Exodia needs to get 5 pieces, so there's going to be a lot of searching, a lot of drawing. A simple Ash Blossom and Joyous Springs can completely silence this deck, a single impermanence in like any hand trap whatsoever. And even if your opponent does not interrupt you and you win the coin flip, you're still not guaranteed to get all the pieces before you're unable to draw any more cards. So Exodia is often more of a gimmick deck. If you're somebody that really enjoys just having fun and you don't really care about competing and stuff, then you probably use a deck like this. There are plenty of other examples, but Exodia is the one that I wanted to showcase. Next up, we have Stun. Stun is a variant of control that takes control too far, if you ask me. The entire goal of Stun is to use a bunch of annoying cards to keep your opponent from being able to play the game effectively. Stopping them from special summoning, stopping them from using card effects, stopping them from searching their decks, shutting off their graveyard, you name it. Stun players got it, right? So Stun, especially if it goes first, can be insanely oppressive and annoying to deal with. However, some of the weaknesses with Stun decks are that they are slow. It's going to take them forever to kill you, and every turn that they take is a chance for the opponent to draw an out to the situation. They kind of need to go first because the whole point of Stun is to prevent the opponent from setting up their plays at all. And if you go second with a Stun deck, a lot of your cards are going to be useless because your opponent, they went first, they already set up their plays. So it's going to be a lot harder to clear their board and get their monster off of the board, right? So yeah, also Stun it's not consistent, it doesn't have an engine, so it doesn't think of a car frame without an engine. You kind of have to push it along with your bare hands, and that's not the easiest task, even for somebody that's pretty strong. So that's one of those are some of the issues that stun has. But if you're the type of player that just that just really does not want to let your opponent do anything, then you might like stun. Also, if you're a player that is a lot slower, you don't, maybe there's too much going on in the card game and you don't want to run out of time trying to read and develop plays a lot, you might be able to play stuff. Next up, we have combo slash mid-range decks. Almost all of these next decks represent that. These four here. Centurion is such an example that people use to say pretty much what a mid-range deck is it's something called aggro. It's a combination between a beatdown deck and control decks. Though I think those are archaic terms because beatdown decks are almost non-existent now. And back in the day, beatdown, the whole point was to attack your opponent on the bunga style with very large attack monsters. But nowadays, there's so much oppression in Yu-Gi-Oh! That you kind of have to control the pace of the game. So, beatdown strategies are almost non-existent. However, the term aggro is still something that is used quite a bit, right? I would just prefer to call it mid-range. Mid-range decks are a decent balance between control and aggro. They are typically decks that you will find most often as meta contending decks or competitive decks, especially in the format for Master Duel because of Max C. Max C punishes decks that need to special summon to get threats out. And what mid-range decks allow you to do is they allow for you to get threatening plays to slow your opponent down without having to special summon. Right. So they're very versatile. You can pivot into a lot of different things. Usually you can pivot into a lot of different things with mid-range decks. However, as stated before, they since they are a combination of control and beatdown, quote unquote, they don't do either of these things to an extreme degree. They're not like a combo hyper aggressive deck, beatdown deck that can just kill you on the bunga style very fast with giant monsters. Usually it requires a bit of setup to get to that point. And they're also not a full control deck. Where with control decks, the longer the game goes on, your opponent is just going to slowly lose the game because you're going to gather so many resources. So some of the weaknesses that they have is that mid-range decks find it very difficult to push through established boards unless you simplified the game state with hand traps and things of that nature. These type of decks usually depend on big board breakers or hand traps in order to simplify the game state or break through a board because due to their balance, you normally are going to have like maybe one starter and extender in your hand. And if you're trying to play into an established board, you're probably going to get stopped. They're probably going to have 2+ negates. Right? So that's the tricky thing with it. However, these are usually the quintessential competitive decks because they are very versatile. They are very good at playing through Max C. They're very good at having different avenues to approach playing the game when they run into problems. They're harder to lock down with floodgates because of their versatility, etc. So that pretty much goes for almost all of these. I mean, Galaxy Eyes kind of is a combo deck, which I can explain further here. But basically, combo decks are... You probably have several different types of combo decks. I mean, I know I spoke about ramp decks with Dark Magician. Technically, ramp decks are a combo deck because you're using 2 or 3 cards to get something seriously threatening on the board. But nowadays, the way I like to think about combo decks are decks that take 50 freaking years for their turn to... because they're doing so much crap. And you're like, dude, can you please just let me play, right? There's special summon 1,000 cards, etc., etc. Think of synchro decks like Junk Synchron, Stardust Dragon, Spirals, and they're probably Addict Nits, the Arrival Addict Nister. That's another example, right? So these are like a lot of like Cyberse Link decks too, hyper combo focus. They're usually most of the time all gas, maybe with a few utility choices like Fall By and Ash to stop Max C, or a few hand traps, but they're usually mostly, if not all gas. They run very few utility cards, almost no board breakers. They usually rely on using raw engine to break through the board, which is ideal. Using your engine, which your deck's focus is to break a board, is ideal and is the way you would normally want to build your deck to play. However, the only caveat with being an all gas deck without any utility or non-engine cards is that if your opponent floodgates you out of the game, let's say that you're using a combo deck like Junk Synchron, and your opponent flips Summon, you just lost the game, because since you're using a hyper combo deck, you most likely don't have Harpy's Feather Duster or Lightning Storm or any of those types of cards, because you need multiple pieces in your hand in order to construct your combo. Dark World is another example. That's the example that I'm most familiar with. Dark Worlds require you to run only Dark World monsters and discard out. If you try to do anything else, you will draw horrible hands and your plays won't go very far. There's like zero room for Caught by the Grave and Ash Blossom and things of that nature. So your opponent can just use Max C or Droll and Lockbird, and then you just lost because you don't have anything to answer it. See, whereas mid-range decks, they can use hand traps and set up trap cards and cards in the interruptions in the graveyard in order to get them another turn. If they get drolled and they can't search, they could say, "Oh, I have 3 hand traps in them, so I'll just use those to stop my opponent, and then next turn I'll do a crackdown." If you're using combo decks, a sync 1 or 2 or 3, even 3 hand traps are not going to stop combo decks. They're going to play through them. They have the best tendencies of playing through interruption consistently. However, floodgate effects like different dimension barrier, different dimension shifter, Macrocosmos, D-Fissure, Necro Valley, Jowgen the Spiritual. Well, Jowgen the Spiritual probably isn't that bad. Just floodgates. Skill Drain goes in match. Those cards that either last an entire turn, 2 turns, or the entire game. Combo decks die if the floodgate is effective against the combo deck in question, because they usually don't run a lot of cards that can stop those types of scenarios. But probably the best example of a combo deck I have listed here is actually the Arrival Cyberse Addict. This is a true combo deck. Now this deck I think does use a few utility cards like Caught By and stuff, but I've never seen like board breakers or a bunch of hand traps against when these types of decks are playing. But yeah, so those are combo decks, and then of course you have Yugioh, which is the deck to beat in this game right now apparently. I'd probably say it's like a hybrid between mid-range / combo deck. They're versatile. They can definitely pivot into different methods of approaching the game. However, they can also take 50 years to do a play. So, yeah, Yugioh, mid-range combo, depending on how you build it. Voiceless Voice, I would say, is a control deck / mid-range deck. You're not going to be comboing for 50 years with this deck. Your turns are pretty short. They focus on kind of controlling the pace of the game by creating a situation that's difficult for the opponent to deal with. Untargetable monsters with 4,100 attack, and the ability to negate stuff. Yeah. But control decks, the issue with them is that they can be overwhelmed. Control decks are usually going to lose to combo decks if they don't have floodgates. If you don't have a floodgate in your control deck, there's a very good chance that you will lose to a big combo deck like Dark Horse or something. That's why you would always see control decks like Eldritch before all the floodgates got limited and banned. That's why you would always see Eldritch win games so much because of the floodgates. Now that the floodgates are gone, Eldritch is just kind of not much of a threat. So, I might have missed some things, some nomenclature when it comes to defining the types of deck building strategies, but those are the terms that I'm currently going to be using for most of the decks that have come to mind currently. Like again, just to reiterate, you have your combo decks, you have your mid-range decks, and then you have like your control decks, and then you have like little subdivisions of these like ramp control. Like ramp combo, big I'ma summon 80 million times, take 50 minutes long combos. Control decks that are mid-range, pure control decks that don't have a lot of one-card plays. Combo decks that are pure engine combo decks that have a bit of mid-range to them, where they can play some hand traps or something. So there's a lot to it, but those are the basics that I want to explain for now. When you want to decide what to pick, those are the type of decks that you will come across more often than not. And also, when deciding what to pick, like I said, card artwork. What decks do you like? Do you like specific attributes like light or dark? Do you like fairies? Do you like winning? That can be a decision if you pick a competitive deck or not. How fast are you? How slow are you? I know that I'm slow. And that's something that I mentioned earlier, that this is a fundamental concept, but I just recently, within the last half a year, discovered this. I run out of time a lot, and in some of my videos, you probably see me stating the timer at close to 0 seconds, 1 or 2 seconds left. I lose games so much in this game because of the time limit more than almost anything else. And that's just because I'm a slow player. I'm not fast. I'm not a quick player at all. That's just how it is. I'm not fast with things in real life too. However, if I'm given an abundance of time, I'm probably going to consider multiple contingencies, which will make it very difficult for my opponent to be able to outpace me. So that's just the way things work for me. So I work better with decks like Labyrinth, control decks, or voiceless voice, things like that, because they're slower paced. I can take my time and read my opponent's cards and really assess the situation and then make my play, and not have to worry about the clock teetering on 10 minus seconds left for it. So, or maybe you're a big combo player. Maybe you're the type of player that you don't have the greatest, most meticulous approach to being able to outmaneuver your opponent's cards. So you've got to just go first, make a gigantic board with 50 plus negates so that they have no way of playing through it, right? And maybe in that situation, you're more quickly oriented, you're quicker of wit, you're able to read fast and determine the situation more quickly. So there's a lot to this. This is a very basic, bare bones video by comparison what we're going to be getting into in the next ones, but I wanted to start at a very basic level when it comes to the whole deck building thing. And then as time goes on, we're going to advance things more in terms of card ratios that you want to run in your deck, how to determine what cards are effective to be used, synergy, how many cards should I run in a deck, 40, 60, etc. We're going to go over a lot of that stuff in the following masterclass videos. But that's going to be it for this one. Thank you all very much for watching, and hopefully you learned something here or reinforced something that you're already familiar with. As Geralt of Rivia states, You always want to go over the fundamentals, right? Even if it's something that you know. Brushing up on the fundamentals will only reinforce the strength of the or structure of your knowledge and experience and with deck building in general. So, but feel free to leave any comments if you have anything you want to contribute. If you have any ideas or suggestions about how these decks can be described, or if you just have any questions about deck building in general or some of the things that I discussed here, feel free to comment below. Um, like the video if you like it, subscribe if you want. This is going to be Sage Armageddon signing out. Hope you all have a great day.